Okay, good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. If you put your headsets on, it'll probably be easier. Thank you very much to our audience for being here this morning, and welcome to the session called Harmonizing Standards to Boost Energy Efficient Appliances and Decarbonisation. My name is James Wood. I am the Director of Communications at the International Electrotechnical Commission. It's my pleasure to host my eminent group of panelists this morning. I'm very pleased to welcome you all here. Thank you very much for coming along and attending. By way of short introduction, I'll tell you who we have up here on the stage next to me. To my immediate left, we have Ms. Jane Cohen, who is an analyst at the International Energy Agency. Jane, thank you very much for being here today. We have Mr. Hubert Zahn, who is Assistant Manager and Energy Efficiency Inspection and Enforcement at the Ghanaian Energy Commission. Hubert, thank you very much for being here. Next to Hubert, we have Ms. Kana Iwazawa from Daikin. She's an external relations specialist. And then next to Kana, we have Ms. Nida Rizwan Farid, who is at the Council of Engineers for Energy Transition, and she is a founder of Save Joules, which I'm sure you'll be telling us about shortly. And then last in the line, hiding in the corner, we have Mr. Howard Porter, who is a green energy expert and IEC Market Strategy Board member. So welcome, and thank you to all of my panelists. In this session this morning, and through the discussion today, we hope to shine a light on why harmonized standards are a critical factor in achieving the goal of doubling up on energy efficiency improvements, and what we can do together to ensure momentum in turning aspirations into concrete action. I would like to perhaps set a little bit of context before we get to the insights of our panelists by saying that obviously COP29 seeks to follow up on COP28's commitment to double up on energy efficiency and accelerate the transition away from fossil fuels. Energy efficiency is one of the biggest factors, potentially, in achieving climate targets, and represents one of the easiest ways, potentially, to cut non-renewable energy usage. By improving energy efficiency, less renewable energy capacity is also needed, meaning fewer resources will be used up in building new renewable energy projects. In fact, energy efficiency is so important to the world's net zero journey that the IEA Executive Director Fatih Birol has described it as the world's first fuel. You may have heard that before. Or to put it another way, the best fuel is the energy that we don't waste. And I'm sure that will be a recurring theme throughout our discussion here. The good news, I think, is that we've got this understanding coming out of COP28, and we also have most of the technologies that we need to achieve energy efficiency. The way forward most likely lies in the convergence of that technology in finance and in consumer behavior. And I think we'll be touching on a lot of those themes in our conversation here this morning. Key actions to double energy efficiency progress, measures like improvement in the technical efficiency of buildings, behavioral changes, and greater electrification can reduce emissions by more than 7 gigatons by 2030. So a lofty goal, but achievable, we think. So we'll discuss more with our panel on how standards, and in particular harmonized standards, can set the framework for efficient systems and operations across sectors. And obviously, to help us understand the pieces of the puzzle and how the jigsaw fits together, we have views from, I think, across some of the most important sectors of industry and consumer behavior. So with that, I'd like to pose an open question, I think, to all my panelists, which is, why do we need to focus on energy efficiency now, and what role can harmonized standards play in achieving energy efficiency goals? And I'm just going to go down the line. So, Jane, I'll start with you, if I may.
Thank you very much, James. And I think you hit on a lot of the key points that many of us will be making, and primarily just that energy efficiency is such a huge opportunity around the world, and it's really the moment that we must be capitalizing on it. But I wanted to answer your question first by just giving us a little more context. And I have a few slides here. So as you mentioned, at COP28, governments around the world committed to doubling of energy efficiency. At IEA, we just released our energy efficiency market report. So if you want to know more about what I'm about to say here, please check it out. But what we have found is that despite some progress, progress on making this goal is sluggish. And we're really seeing that in a lot of places. Actually, emerging and developing economies is where we're seeing some of the biggest gains. But we are not seeing the progress towards that goal that we need to. Next slide, please. Emerging and developing economies will be consuming more electricity in the future, which is a good thing as appliances become more affordable. But global consumption in general does need to go down, which means that some countries will have to just grow extremely efficiently, and others will have to decrease their consumption. Next slide, please. As James mentioned, this is really not a technology problem. We know that the technology exists out there, but it's about harmonization, it's about policy, it's about implementation. IEA analysis has showed that over the lifetime, these much more efficient appliances are more affordable. And that's really a point that I want to make as we're thinking about access to electricity, as we're thinking about increasing standard of living around the world. The fact that over the lifetime these are more affordable is a really, really key point. So how are we going to do this? So we do need good standards, and I know that's why we're here. SEED, which is the Super Efficient Equipment and Appliance Deployment Initiative, which is coordinated by the IEA, gathers 25 member countries to share experience on these key issues. And one of the most important topics around this work is this regional harmonization. But I want to just to kind of go back to the question that that James actually posed to me, which is why is this so important? So I think, again, we know that energy efficiency, without really making this doubling progress, the world is not going to be on track for reaching our climate goals. That's just, we know that. And just to put this a little bit more in perspective, in a pathway that's aligned with IEA's scenario for achieving net zero energy sector emissions by 2050, accelerating these energy efficiency improvements can deliver over 70% of the projected decline in oil demand and 50% of the reduction in gas demand by 2030. So that is really, really significant. And I think those numbers are so big, it's almost hard to contemplate the gains that can be had through energy efficiency. But I think it's important to say it again and again so that policymakers, industry, and others really see that this is the path that we have to be focusing on. So with that, I'm going to stop here. But looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much for setting out that additional context, Jane. And yes, we'll come to you next, Hubert. So obviously you can perhaps bring some of that regional perspective that Jane just talked about.
Right. So I think the system has been put in perspective, and basically Ghana is. Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. So yeah. Ghana, Sub-Saharan Africa, is one of the countries that is trying to champion energy efficiency. And what we usually would say is that energy efficiency is the secret turbine, that propels power at a cheaper cost. Mm-hmm. And so Ghana tried to invest in what we call the minimum energy performance standards as the low-hanging fruits. And in developing minimum performance standards, what else can you do than not to reinvent the wheel? So we looked at what standards are available, what application we could use, and what appliances we could use. And IEC came very handy in terms of standards. So we took the international standards developed by IEC. In the case of refrigerators, IEC 62552 was a very critical point that we could use. And we realized that standards talks to every person. Standards talks to the manufacturer in terms of language barriers. Once you quote the standards, they know what you are requiring. And so what we did was to adapt the necessary standards by the Ghana Standards Authority and then transform all of that into policy. In our case, standards are usually voluntary until you come up with a regulation that enforces the standards. So we came up with a regulation for appliances, and Ghana is proud to mention that we have channeled and expanded our scope to 19 appliances, ranging from household to industry, electric motors, distribution transformers, setting all these standards. Now, what does these standards mean for manufacturers? So we moved away from just putting punitive measures in our enforcement in terms of policy decision to trying to negotiate with manufacturers. And so once the standards have been passed, both IEC and ISO, we took these standards and went to the manufacturers and said, this is what Ghana requires in this market in terms of minimum energy performance. And it was quite easier because then we could negotiate with these factories to say that this is the minimum performance. What we are requiring is nothing new under the globe. And so standards are very critical in terms of promoting energy efficiency. And I would say that enhancing these performance is also very critical. And it has gone a long way to help us. Now, transforming all of these standards, how does that benefit the consumer? The upfront cost of these products will also mean will be high. But once we harmonize the standards, Africa is a very big market. And so harmonization will mean that other countries which adopt these same standards will have a bigger market, and so economies of scale will come in. And so we will not have that argument where high efficient products are more expensive because more are demanding for these products. So there is an interlink on, first of all, identifying the standards, not reinventing the wheel, taking either IEC or ISO standards, developing it and contextualizing it in your own situation, and then coming up with a policy, which is the regulation. And in coming up with the policy, make sure you are also negotiating with these factories to make sure that they are meeting this minimum requirement. The critical aspect about harmonization, which I keep on emphasizing, is that a lot of countries have started setting stringent measures in terms of efficiency. What that means is that when countries do not adapt these standards, then there's a tendency of what we call dumping. And the dumping means that these products ideally are not meant to be used in these countries of origin. And so once stringent standards have been set, the products that do not meet the standards need to find another market. And so when you do not have these standards in your territory, then you find all these new, inefficient or substandard products also containing high GWP in terms of the cooling appliances. So it is very critical for us to harmonize these standards, especially in the region and then globally. So this is my initial statement.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. You've given us some real insight there in terms of the critical role that standards play in achieving energy efficiency, but you've also pointed to a considerable market opportunity and opportunity for much more harmonization. Thank you. Hubert, maybe Kana now, if we could come to you with the same question. Why energy efficiency? Why now? And how do harmonized standards play this role?
Okay, I'm Kana Iwazawa from Daikin Industries. Daikin is a global manufacturer of air conditioners, and air conditioners actually use a lot of energy. So 10% of the energy usage in the world is come from the air conditioning actually. So we need to, but the electricity has not fully decarbonized, and its emission intensity is too high from the electricity. So we need to reduce the energy consumption. We need to go forward to the energy efficiency. So we are promoting high energy efficient inverter air conditioner as a manufacturer, and we are an inverter technology makes 50% energy consumption reduction compared to the conventional model non-inverter air conditioners. So we are promoting inverter air conditioners, but there is a barrier at the price gap between inverter and non-inverter. So we need market to change, and we need a standard and regulations to change the market. So this is the relationship of the importance of energy efficiency and regulation and standards for our sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Interesting insights about the need for your market to change. Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe, Nida, if we come to you next, I think you perhaps have a slightly different perspective.
Yeah, actually, after hearing everyone speaking, I've decided to change what I'm going to say a little bit and put more into context why energy efficiency is important first. So the thing is, as consumers, most of us don't realize that it's not the energy that we need, right? We actually need a service like light or cooling, entertainment, mobility, productivity, food, etc. Nobody needs energy. Energy efficiency is the way we can get that service using the least amount of energy. So energy efficiency also makes those services fuel agnostic, right? So you can get heating from gas, you can get heating from electricity, you can get heating from oil, etc. So as consumers, it's very important for us to understand or decouple the link between what is really needed. So we are always talking about what is the energy we need, whereas we should be discussing the service needs of a consumer. So I think that's why energy efficiency is important, because a consumer needs to realize that they can, for instance, refrigerators. If you're using a 10-year-old refrigerator, it could be using as much as 10 kilowatt hours a day of electricity. Whereas a new energy efficient refrigerator right now is using just 1 kilowatt hour a day. That is why energy efficiency is important, because technology is accelerating so fast that you can get that same service using much, much less energy than you did 10, 15, 20 years ago. So I did want to bring that context into the picture. And now in this context, then standards are very important, because you know, the market has like a push and pull effect. So setting minimum energy performance standards allows you to remove the most inefficient appliances off the market. Okay, and so the consumer no longer even has to guess which appliance is good for them, because the regulators have made sure to do their job and only allow appliances above a certain energy efficiency performance, so above the minimum energy performance standards, into the market. And then you complement that by having energy labeling, where you highlight what are the highest efficiency performing appliances. What are the appliances that will give you, where you will use the least amount of energy to get the service that you want. So these two systems work together, and the energy labeling then pulls the market towards high efficient appliances, while as MEPS, minimum energy performance standards, just remove the bottom away from the market. So I think they're extremely important in raising the awareness of consumers without them having to do any homework in what is good for them and what is not, or what is good for their energy bills at the end of the month.
Thank you. In fact, I think it was the IEA who have said that they estimate 55% of emissions reduction will in fact be driven by consumer choice. So what you've highlighted there is really, really interesting, and just by virtue of buying a new piece of equipment as opposed to using an old one already delivers a huge amount of energy efficiency. So something as simple as that, and that's a core message for people to understand. Lastly, Howard, let's come to you to get your take on the role that standards play.
Well, firstly, I'm delighted to hear what my panelists have said, because I agree with everybody already. So it's done, you know. I think the message that energy efficiency is one of the key areas for the future, I think, has been understood for many years. I'm delighted that across the world that's understood. In terms of the role of standards in this, again, it's been well, I think Hubert made a very, very valid point, that if you have a standard in one country and something has been exceptionally well done in a country or a region, the approach to bring that to the world level in electricity in terms of the IEC and let the IEC develop that standard to be a world standard, then that is allowable to all other countries to use that standard. And I think we've got people here from the regulation side as well as the manufacturer side, and it works for both sides because it allows the regulator to regulate.
Exactly.
Either in terms of a labeling scheme that you mentioned, a minimum performance level, which I think was mentioned elsewhere. None of this can be done without the effect of having agreed standards for how the product works. So I think we all probably agree on the panel and hopefully in the audience that that is the case. And I think from an IEC perspective, we would like more people to get involved in that process across the world and offer the best-in-class efficiency. And if, for instance, in air conditioning, that's a very good example, maybe take that. So if Daikin in Japan has developed a standard for a super efficient air conditioner, well, the best thing to do is to bring that standard into the IEC, develop that into a world standard, and then allow everybody in the world to use that standard. And that benefits Daikin because they might be buying Daikin equipment in Chile once they've developed that. So I think we're all in agreement here that this is a role. The challenge is always, of course, getting that message across to everybody that that's the approach that should be taken. And James, that's perhaps a good theme for discussion. How do we get everybody within the different markets around the world to understand that the process we've just discussed is the way to deliver energy efficiency? Yep. How do we get that to work more efficiently?
Fantastic. Well, it's always nice when we're aligned in terms of our thinking, and of course, Howard, you're absolutely right. We need to work together, I guess, and collaboratively to get that message out, and hopefully we can come on to some of that, perhaps. So, in that context, Jane, I'm going to come back to you. Thinking about that, actually, how do we move forward? You know, what are some of the most effective initiatives that you see to boost energy efficiency? What are the challenges that remain? What are the opportunities? How do we actually collaborate and spread the word and make sure that the alignment that we're seeing on this panel becomes broader?
Just a small question.
Yeah, sorry.
But I actually wanted to just mention two other things here quickly, which is when we talk about increasing energy efficiency, one of the most important areas that we need to focus on as policymakers is the workforce. And this is another place, I think, where we see this standardization as really important. Already there is a gap in the energy efficiency workforce, and we see that just growing and growing as this doubling is moving forward. And so when we talk about standardization and when we're thinking about equipment, it's not just about from an energy consumption perspective, it's really also about having this trained workforce that understands how to use, how to install, how to maintain, and that is going to be one of the biggest challenges that we face in the doubling of energy efficiency. And the other thing I wanted to add is just picking up on Anita's point about consumers. That all of this is that we're talking about, again, is of course very important, but unless we can really communicate this to consumers and not just through labeling, et cetera, we need to really figure out how to meet people where they are. Yeah. Most people are not thinking about how efficient their appliance is, even if we know that at the end of the day, it will lower their bill. And so we need to, I think, really sort of revamp the way we are trying to communicate the benefits of efficiency and make it much easier for people. I mean, it's true that you can make that decision that you don't need to do your homework, but that's almost even a step too far. It's how has it just become really the default for people to be choosing these more efficient products? Again, not just because it's good for emissions reductions, but because ultimately we do see it lowering energy bills, and that is so important for consumers. So then, quickly to your actual question about how we move forward, I think it's really important that we act now, and that as we are working on harmonizing our standards, that all of these new technologies that are coming through, that they're being integrated today. Because if we don't think about interoperability, if we don't think about some of these, demand flexibility, et cetera, now, as we're really working together on these harmonization of standards, it's going to become harder, more expensive, and it is going to continue to have this effect of having different standards in different places as certain regions and certain areas are incorporating these new technologies and these new innovations. So I think I would just finish quickly by saying this is really important. I think this communication and coordination across government, across industry, is really where we're going to see the progress that we need to make.
Jane, thank you very much. So you've touched an awful lot there on the need to reach consumers. So I think I'm going to come back to Nida to get your take on that. So you've probably got first-hand experience of doing that, and some tips and tricks up your sleeve about how we can, as you say, meet people where they are.
So one mistake I've seen many governments do is that they tend to come out with a booklet for consumers to look at. Now the problem with the booklet is that if you have 10 or 20 things listed in there, nobody will use even one of them. It's just too much information on the page. So in Pakistan, we've launched, so this is a private effort. My company is called Save Jewels. So we run awareness campaigns on social media, where it's just one tip per post. So something as simple as used cold wash instead of warm wash, and you're going to save about 90% on your washing machine bill, right? Or just press one button and turn on the energy saving mode on any of your appliances or in your car, and you're going to save between 20 to 50% based on which appliance or vehicle you're talking about. So there are really tips like this, or how to fix your gas leaks, because you could have maybe 30 or 40% gas leaks in your house and you don't know about that, right? So just one tip at a time that the consumer can use on a grassroots level to make an instant change in their energy use and on their energy bills by the end of the month. So we find this sort of the simplest way to reach consumers, because I think governments forget the way an individual works. I mean, you can't drown them in information, and you can't give them a booklet like you would to engineers or policymakers, right? So you have to reach them at their level. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So you're dealing with the sharp end, you might say, of the consumer, and Hubert, you, in a way, you sort of...
Can I just add one?
Sure, go ahead.
So we've actually had consumers reach out to us, and so we run free Facebook ad campaigns. We reach about 1 million consumers every month. And we've had people reach out to us and say, oh, we saved a lot of electricity this summer, looking forward to your heating posts in the winter. So it's kind of nice to get that feedback.
It's good endorsement. Yeah, excellent. So I see energy efficiency happening at all ends of the spectrum. So that's the sharp end, the consumer, meeting them with a message that they understand, actions, tangible, practical actions that they can take in their daily lives. And then Hubert, you've obviously approached energy efficiency in your work through, as you've explained to us, embedding standards and creating the sort of policy and regulatory framework for that. What are your lessons for how to achieve success when it comes to energy efficiency?
Yeah, right. So when you look at the whole concept of energy efficiency, usually because it's not that tangible, people do not appreciate it. For example, when you open your tap and then the water is dropping, you realize that you are quick to go and close the tap. But we don't see this kind of wastage when it comes to electricity. You know, you are sitting in your hall, you are watching television, your radio is on, the air condition is on. You do not see the wastage compared to the tangibility of the water that is pouring out. And so we need to find a way of also packaging energy efficiency. And I'm tying that to the policy. Most of these energy efficiencies have to be developed by governments, by policies. Now, the politician does not appreciate what you mean by gigawatt savings and tons of CO2. he's thinking of winning the next elections. And so how do we quantify all of these savings into monetary value that could in turn convince this politician to say, when you implement energy efficiency in your country, this is the savings. This is the amount of money that you would have been, saving on this. Converting that into coming up with power plants, you would have been saving this amount to use it to build hospitals, probably roads, and then the politician can, actually appreciate this. But when you start talking about the gigawatts, then they're a little bit lost in all of this. So from a policy point of view, I think this is how we should approach it. Packaging energy efficiency, its savings, into quantifying it in terms of monetary values, and then the savings that governments can make in terms of infrastructure, roads, putting it into the economy so that they can appreciate that. Now, harmonization is also another key. When we were trying to set up our maps, we realized that there were a lot of standards all over. But specifically, we know that IEC and ISO have specific standards when it comes to products. So I will also encourage that both IEC and ISO do not try to reinvent the wheel. If there is a standard for air conditioners, which we know ISO has standards, 5151 and 16358, it is enough for us to work with. IEC does not have to come up with another standard for air conditioners. IEC is perfect with refrigerators, which we know you have your standards for. So these things have to be harmonized so that countries are not also confused in terms of what to adapt. And as I said, these standards speak a lot. When Ghana went to China to meet the manufacturers, they were lost with what our requirements were. As soon as we mentioned the IEC standards, they said, yes, we know what you are talking about. Is this what you want? We said, yes. We need IEC, so and so. And once you mention that reference number, they know what to do in terms of testing. And it gives uniformity in terms of the protocol, how testing should be done. If we want to even verify, we use the same standard to verify, and conformity will be equal. So the last point is also capacity building. How do we spread the words? And that is the opportunities in standards. Ghana has learned the hard way. It wasn't easy coming up with all of this. Now, how do we get the other regions to appreciate the importance of standards? We can use such countries as case study to advocate so that people know that it is not science, it is not, rocket science. It is something that is doable. You just need a plan, a strategy, and more advocacy. So those are the opportunities I see in standard adaptation and then harmonization of these standards.
Very good and very clear. Thank you. I'm very impressed that you can memorize all of those standards numbers. Howard, I guess that's also encouraging for you to hear from an IEC perspective. I mean, to answer some of what Hubert was saying there, what can the IEC do potentially to ensure that simplicity, that uniformity that that Hubert has just been pointing to?
How can I? First of all, I think that, as I mentioned before, and as mentioned by other panelists, is to use the best practice in wherever it is, and bring that forward into the standards process. But also taking forward the fact that if that product is made to the efficient standard, it almost takes away the decision of the consumer. Exactly. Because if that product is done to the higher standard and the regulator has removed the bottom, you want to try and take away the consumer's choice not to use it. If they can't buy the inefficient product, then they buy the efficient product. And that becomes the way. Now, that only tends to work, as we mentioned before, if you have standards around the world that are the same for the same product. But one thing I think was mentioned, at the end, in terms of the more complex nature of buildings and using different electrical equipment. At a simple level, a washing machine operates on its own. So we have to make that washing machine operate in its most efficient level for water and electricity use. However, if you have a more advanced system where you are integrating that with, say, solar energy and batteries, the interoperability standards, I think, are becoming even more important than developing the product standards. Because the interoperability, and I know this, having tried to do this in the UK for many years, is the washing machine manufacturer, and including Daikin in terms of air conditioning, will have a way that that product works and perhaps communicates, but a different industry has developed their standards and a different way of communicating. So the big challenge in the future will be getting the air conditioning company, the washing machine company, the photovoltaic company, and perhaps the energy company, all have to use the same communication standard. Because if they don't have the same communication standard, then you can't get the system to operate at its most efficient level. But I do appreciate that's advanced and having, in some markets, it's about getting the product in, but in more advanced ways of using, you have to think about how it integrates.
But there are ways to already do that, though. Yeah. Through battery management systems, you can do that already.
Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, so if you install your solar system, you can have your battery management system, well, your entire software management system for the solar thing. That can turn on certain appliances at certain times.
Yep.
So for instance, when solar is at its peak, that's when you can program the system to say, okay, this is when the dishwasher turns on and the washing machine and the water pump and all of these. Let's use it all at the time when we have solar generation at maximum, and then only have minimum night load, for instance. So current softwares already handle.
I wish I had that.
Yeah.
Really, I have a lot to do in my house.
Yeah.
If I can maybe come back on this, it's great, I absolutely agree. However, in order for that to work around the world, for that example to work, it has to be developed in a world standard.
Exactly.
And I don't know the example you're referring to, but that software is probably developed by a software company.
Usually the solar company or the inverter company or the battery company. Yes.
Yeah. Now, typically, those companies don't necessarily talk to the other companies to make sure it works. And this is an example where if we want this to really work, it can't be specific to one manufacturer. And I'm very glad to hear what you're saying, but in the experience where we've done it before in Europe, it works if you've got the same manufacturer. I agree with your software and I agree with your software, but Hubert's software doesn't work. Therefore, Hubert's solution can't operate with our system, but we want to make sure that Hubert's product can also work with our system. And to do that, you've got to elevate that good example up to the world level. Can we develop that suite of interop standards so that Hubert's company and all ours can, yes, if I want to communicate my product with this, it works. And I don't have to use our bit of software that we've developed. That makes sense.
So maybe that's a good lead-in, because Kana, we haven't heard from you yet, but from your industry perspective, what are the benefits and what are the opportunities to go down the harmonized standards route?
Yes, hearing everybody's opinion, I would like to introduce our activity doing in the world to promote standard regulation. And we are contributing to the government in the emerging countries. Could you Could you put the slide?
Yeah, we do have
Yeah.
a slide, I think, for Kana.
Thank you.
I think it's slide 7, if we can get that out.
And we are promoting energy efficiency regulations aligned with the ISO standard, and we are doing a public and private partnership together with the government and international organizations. And what we do is that we are suggesting the energy efficiency regulation mainly in 3 points. One is the MIPS, second is the labeling system, and third is the CSPF criteria. And first one, MIPS, minimum energy performance, it sets the lowest level of the air conditioners can get into the market. So the government can decide how much energy efficiency needed for the air conditioners to sell in the market. The second one, labeling, as Nida said, it's really good, important for the awareness. So air conditioners, if you imagine you go to the store and buy air conditioners, they're all the same looking, same appearance air conditioners lining up at the store. So customer cannot know which one is really energy efficient. Just so customer just choose the cheapest, just by the price.
Exactly.
So if labeling is there, customer can know which one is really energy efficient, how much energy they can save per year, how much electricity cost they can save. So they can see a clear benefit to choose the energy efficiency air conditioners. So labeling is really important. And the third one, CSPF criteria. This is actually based on the ISO standard, and this is really important to evaluate actual performance of air conditioners. So with usual criteria for using air conditioners is like COP, EER. These are just evaluate 1 point of the degrees of the performance of the air conditioners, 35 degrees. But CSPF criteria just look for the seasonal energy efficiency.
Yeah.
So it's really properly evaluate energy efficiency of the air conditioners. So we are suggesting this energy efficiency regulation to the government and in all over the world. So we lead the project together with the government and international agencies all over the world. And actually, we just started the new project in Africa, Nigeria. And we are doing demo tests, comparing inverter and non-inverter energy consumption in actual circumstances, actual temperature throughout the year in Nigeria. We are taking the data we just started. And by using this actual data, we will analyze the impact of the energy efficiency, energy reduction of the air conditioners, and GHG reduction of GHG reduction made by air conditioners using inverter. So we did demonstration tests all over the world, and we got result like 50% reduction for the inverter air conditioners. So technology is here and it's available and ready to implement.
Yep.
So we need regulation to support the market change. So this is what we are doing. Right
Really, really good. And obviously a very clear link between your initiatives and your messaging to consumers in order to shape consumer behavior. So you're really sort of working across government, industry and consumer, which is great. And I have a sense that everyone here is doing that to some degree. So maybe that leads us on to perhaps the sort of final question that we can discuss before we throw it open for questions from the audience, which I would really like to be able to do. Just for your perspectives in summarizing what we need to do to collaborate further, and what are the kind of concrete next steps that you think would be really important for us to take. I don't know who wants to take that first. Nina?
So I realize in this entire session I haven't mentioned yet the work that UNEP has done, United Nations Environment Program. So we are part of the Council of Engineers for the Energy Transition, which is the advisory council for the UN Secretary General on his energy roadmap. And we belong to the energy efficiency working group within that. And we've put together a brief called the Potential Energy Savings from Minimum Energy Performance Standards and Energy Labeling in the Global South. So what we've identified is, well, the IEA first actually identified that back in 2021 that there were about 72 countries that still did not have minimum energy performance standards or energy labeling schemes around the world. Within our paper, we've identified about 57 countries that don't have it, either have no implementation or low implementation of these standards. So what we've tried to do within the paper is to first introduce to governments or policymakers what the minimum energy performance standards and energy labeling schemes are, how they work and which are the countries currently implementing them and what savings they have seen from them by implementing them. Then showing to them the potential savings they can receive if they were to implement them, and sort of put together the necessary steps and the organizations that they can reach out to in help in implementing these systems. So while working with the United Nations Environment Program on this, we found out that they have already developed global model regulation guidelines that can easily be implemented by any country around the world, which include the minimum energy performance standards for lights, air conditioners, domestic and commercial, so residential and commercial refrigerators, ceiling fans, transformers, and a couple of other appliances. And the minimum energy performance standards that they have identified are covering about 50% of the electricity use of any country. At the same time, they collect country saving assessments for about 154 emerging and developing economies as well. And they already have a prototype product registration database ready for countries to go ahead and implement in that. So countries just need to take their guidelines, modify it a little bit for their local scenario, and just implement it. So this is the United for Efficiency that you had identified as your partner over there. So, so they are doing this, and in a number of things, of course, for motors, everyone uses IEC standards, right, to identify the minimum energy performance standards. But within this, they have identified a reasonably aggressive, for air conditioners, for instance, they've identified 6 as the minimum, whereas many countries around the world are using a SEER of 3 right now, and the best available technology is almost at 12 right now. Right? So they have identified relatively aggressive minimum energy performance standards that can be implemented globally without issue. Those are technology that those markets have available within their own countries, right? And it avoids, as you said, the product dumping, right? If you have that aggressive a minimum energy performance standard. So what I would like to suggest is that IEC, ISO, IEA of course, and UNEP and U4E worked together in sort of complementing each other's work. I think UNEP is very good in coming up with the regulations that are also necessary, and in the future they could be using IEC standards as the numbers they identify, or they include them within the regulations. So they are very good in interacting with countries and governments. They're already working to help many countries implement these schemes, also through a regional working groups. So I would suggest these organizations to get together and complement each other's works. Because as far as I know, for IEC, they have implemented, or rather created standards for motors. This is IEC 0 level and this is IEC 4 level for motor performance standards, energy performance standards. But for other appliances, within their standards, there is no minimum energy performance standard identified. And that is, I think, something that IEC should expand into for it to be useful for energy standards harmonization.
Yep, that's excellent. Thank you so much. A really practical, tangible step that can be taken. And thank you for highlighting how minimum energy performance standards are helping one appliance, one country at a time. So yeah, really nice. If there are no further insights from the panel, I think we'd probably like to see if the audience has any questions. Perhaps, Howard, you have
I think it's a very good suggestion I think the type of standard you're referring to is different to it's almost doing the regulator's job for them. So that if you can have a performance standard, it is a little different to does the product work and is it safe? And it needs to be slightly differently thought about. The performance standard, I absolutely agree with you, but it's
because
how...
we are talking about energy efficiency standards,
Absolutely,
harmonization.
absolutely. And how you can get that minimum efficiency is perhaps not the way that most people think about standards. But I absolutely agree. One final thing that I would recommend to all on the panel in the audience is to really look into the Eco Directive at European Union level. The Eco Directives have been going for, I think, 20 years plus. And certainly I've been working on them and arguing with them for many years. But again, in the context of if it's been done, you don't need to repeat the work. I think the Eco Directive now has gone to 50 different product areas, and some of them are very well advanced. And I know for a fact that for washing machines and dishwashers, the labeling scheme had to be recategorized because all the products were at the highest level. All of them. Therefore, the consumer couldn't differentiate between them. Therefore, a new scheme came in, and now even the best one is a D, which is a little bit disconcerting. So that means that the manufacturers are now looking to get to A in the new scheme. So I would advocate, look to what the European Union's done.
And also what Japan's doing with the Top Runner program. That's phenomenal.
And the similar. So
that's phenomenal.
So using those examples that have been done, and I'm not saying adopt everything that has been done, but the approach, don't reinvent the approach if it's already been done somewhere. And again, that's all based on international standards.
Okay, thank you. Right. We have left a little bit of time for questions. So I wonder if we have anything that the audience would like to ask. If so, we have a question there. Could you please just say your name and who you'd like to direct your question to, if it's
Yeah, Mahal Shabu, I'm also a member of the seat of the Council for Energy Transition. So my question, I have two questions. One is, should there be a standard per region? I have, for example, on the works around the smart grids, Europe was working on their own, and the US, they were working as well with the NIST on their own for standards. And the second is, what are the economics behind the standardization? Okay, can that help accelerate and afford the equipment and the investments, the equipment procurement and the investments? Was there some work, for example, done on the business case for having a standard versus not having a standard somewhere in the industry?
Okay. So two questions there. Hubert, do you want to take the regional piece?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to share Ghana's experience, we have kept on saying that you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Now, what we do is that, for example, when you talk about specific standards for specific regions, you need to take the standard, whether IEC or ISO, which becomes the benchmark. Now, this is a whole committee that has come up with the whole structure in terms of what standards should be developed. Now, based on temperature variations, you know, climates and all of that, you can amend this standard, let's say IEC standard, to contextualize it and localize it. So what we have done in the case of refrigerators was that the IEC standard 62552 was for refrigerators. Ghana, and that standard was tested based on 16 degrees and then 25 degrees. We don't have 16 degrees in Africa. So we needed to contextualize the temperature variation. And once we tempered with temperature variations, it meant that we had to localize the standard. So it becomes a GS IEC, Ghana Standard IEC, but it's taking its roots from the original IEC context. So that is what we need to be thinking about, because the framework has been done already. assuming you temper with one or two things, then you contextualize it to the various country requirements. And that would be the advice. When we're coming up with standards for rice cooker, it was quite difficult. We couldn't find it. So we needed to look at the Chinese example.
Yeah, and the Korean.
We took the Chinese standard and then we contextualized it, and now it becomes the Ghana standard with the reference code there. So I think that is what we need to do, not reinventing the wheel, but taking the base framework, which is an existing standard, and then contextualizing it to the various countries.
Tailoring it for
exactly
appropriate use in the region. Yeah. Okay. And then the second part of the question,
I'll
Nida.
take a shot at it. So I think when you're talking about the economics of it, maybe you mean what the economics is to the manufacturers, but I'm actually going to address what the economics of it is to the consumer and to the government, for instance. So IEA has already identified that the best available technology air conditioner is 3 times more efficient than the average installed conditioner globally right now, whereas it is available at almost the same price in all the markets as that average air conditioner, right? So the economics for the consumer really is that over time, as these minimum energy performance standards and energy labeling schemes have forced manufacturers to put money into R&D and make their appliances more efficient, at the same time that research has also caused the appliance prices to go down, not up. So for the consumer, adopting new appliances after the lifetime is over, of course. We don't want to create an appliance dump in the market. But adopting those new energy efficient appliances are actually not going to cost them more money. So from the consumer, while they will save operational bills every month. So that's the economics from the consumer point of view. From the government point of view, implementing these standards are actually not as expensive as you would think, because the testing responsibility comes onto the manufacturer. The manufacturer has to prove it, that they have met these standards, or they are the ones who prove it and put the labels on as well. And the government just has maybe like an audit or market survey team that goes into the market, picks up a sample here and there, and tests it to verify it's meeting the standards, right? So for the government, this is also not a very expensive thing to do, whereas at the same time, it dramatically cuts their energy imports later on.
So relatively low barrier to entry and benefits for consumers. I think we have time for just...
Otherwise, I add on to the...
Yeah, you could. Yeah. Do we have any other questions? We have one question. Yeah.
I'll take less minute. I am Vali Garayev, philosopher doctor of biological science, advisor of the Institute Standardization of the Ministry of Economy, Azerbaijan Republic. Today you discussed very seriously questions and others. We got a lot of information. Always was climate global. If my memory doesn't fail me, 60 years ago, first incident was in South Africa. Then all those scientific in Stockholm, 1972, and we thank to United Nations from 1995 to this day continue cope. It's a pity that 4 days passed, and I guess we'll enjoy our relegation. And on behalf of this participant, I thank to everyone for presentation, discussing questions, answers. very much. Thank you. And when you will go to your country, our best regards, warmly sunny Baku, to your country, and never global climate problem in the world. Always peace in our country. Thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you very much. Perhaps the most important message of the panel.
Yes,
So, yeah.
wrapping it,
Yeah, thank you very much.
Just to add to the economics, I mean, what we need to, and this is from a government perspective, you know, what we have experienced, especially in Africa, is that there is a burden to be able to verify the claims from these factories. You know, so in the case where you leave the burden on just the manufacturer, there's a tendency for cheating, because they can declare whatever they want to declare, knowing very well that you do not have the means to verify that information. So the dynamics have changed now to having a certain responsibility on government to invest in energy efficiency. And we cannot run away from that. We need to now look at it, how do we solve that? So we need to find a way of supporting countries to be able to come up with testing facilities. Once you have identified the standards, the regulations, how then do you verify these products when you do market surveillance? So testing facilities is needed as a result of all of this. And so that is very critical, and we think that it should be looked at.
Thank you. Carolina, do we have time for one last question? We're over time.
It's over time. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
This has been fantastic. We have run over time, but I'd like to thank all of my panelists for wonderful discussion, and thank you all very much from the audience. Thank you. If you have any feedback, please use the QR code, and let us know what you think.
Great.
Good. Thank you.
No, that
We
was
can
good.
do a
It
group
was
photo.
a large